administrator and a classroom instructor. He is also the former president and CEO of Georgia Security Professionals, and he is also an ordained minister and a former pastor and minister of music and a chaplain. Welcome, Lieutenant LaSalle Smith. Thank you for being with us. We also have with us Sergeant April Moore. She is a sergeant with the Fulton County Marshal's Department. She is responsible for coordinating agency training and ensuring that all sworn personnel are in compliance with the Georgia Peace Officers Standards and Training Council requirements. She is also involved in performing background investigations and coordinating the college internship and physical fitness and wellness programs. In addition to her responsibilities as department training coordinator, she is assigned to the Fulton County Public Safety Training Center, serving as the chief course coordinator. As a registered neutral license with the Georgia Supreme Court Commission on Dispute Resolution, Sergeant Moore employs her skills to augment peace officers' de-escalation training to improve police citizens encounters. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, Sergeant Moore. We have with us Dr. Nikisha Spruill. Dr. Nikisha Spruill has over 18 years experience in DeKalb and Atlanta public schools as a teacher and an administrator. She is currently the assistant principal at Morningside Elementary School. She is also a parent of two young sons, 17 and 22 years old, and she's going to share with us her wealth of knowledge as an educator. And we have with us one of our own young people, Mr. John Radford. He is currently a student at the University of Georgia, and he is a graduate of Arabian Mountain High School, and his current major is political science. Wave at us, Brother John. Great. We also have with us a virtual audience that includes a number of young people, high school students, college students, and parents from New Bethel AME Church that you will hear from after. At this time, I will turn it over to our moderator, who is our pastor, William Thomas. And I think just before he speaks, we're going to show a brief video clip that sets the stage for this evening's dialogue.
I think we're having some technical difficulties, so.
Okay, he will move forward, and that is a PBS, Public Broadcasting, video clip that we will try to bring back together. Brother Tony, is it ready to roll?
I had to transfer to Pastor Thomas.
Okay. Well, I'll turn it over to you, Pastor Thomas, if you want to move on to your first speaker.
Dr. Dozier, if you would continue your discussion, I want to play this video because I think it is going to help us in our discussion for tonight. So if you would continue your discussion and how we got to this point, and it'll give me a moment to get everything together.
I will unmute. So this evening, one of the things that we wanted to be able to address and make sure that we had some opportunity to talk to our young people. If I asked each of them to call out the names, if we each on this program, and for our live audience that is watching us, our virtual audience that is watching us, we could all call out the names of some unarmed African-American boy, girl, young woman, or man. And we do not want our children to be one of those victims. We want them to stay alive. We want them to be safe. And we want to do everything that we can to make sure that that happens. So today, we want our panelists to help us to know, our young people to know how to stay safe and stay alive. So at this time, we're going to see a PBS, and some of you may have seen it. It's a brief clip that we have that helps us to know why this is so important.
10 rules.
10 rules.
10 rules.
10 rules of survival.
10 rules of survival if stopped by the police.
Number 1, be polite and respectful when stopped by the police.
Be polite.
Be respectful.
Remember that your goal is to get home safely.
Your goal is to get home safely.
Your goal is to get home safely. I'm sorry.
Number 2, if you feel your rights have been violated, you and your parents have a right to file a formal complaint with your local police jurisdiction.
Number 3, do not, under any circumstances, get in an argument with the police.
Number 4, always remember that anything you say or do can be used against you in court.
Number 5, keep your hands in plain sight.
Make sure the police can see your hands at all times.
Number 6, avoid physical contact with police officers. Do not make any sudden movements and keep your hands out of your pockets.
Number 7,
Do not.
Do not.
Do not, do not, do not, do not.
Do not run, even if you are afraid. Number 8, even if you believe you are innocent, do not resist arrest.
Number 9, if you are arrested, do not make any statements about the incident until you are able to meet with a lawyer or public defender.
Number 10, stay calm and remain in control.
Watch your words. Watch your body language.
Watch your emotions. Remember.
Remember, your goal is to get home safely.
Get home safely.
All right, thank you so much for your patience in terms of letting us get that together. Very touching video for us on tonight as we begin this discussion. I think touching for the first place that we have to have a video to tell us how to get home safely. But there were a lot of good information that was given in this video. And so our first panelist tonight is Chief Joseph, also known as Jack Lumpkin. And we're going to give you an opportunity to address us on tonight and kind of unpack this video, but also give us some viable feedback in terms of how we can encounter police in a positive way, where we can make it home at night.
Thank you, Reverend, and good evening. I am Jack Lumpkin, as the Reverend introduced me, and I'm appreciative for the opportunity to address you all tonight regarding the best practices and how we actually get our kids home, our grandkids, etc. Unfortunately, I've had to live through the talk before we had videos, where the parents and grandparents gave us the talk how to engage and interact with police. And that was in the 50s. I had to give that same talk, etc., to my son, particularly, and daughters in the late 70s, early 80s, and a late child in the 2000 period. And now I find it giving the same talk to my grandchild, who is a PhD student over at Tech, but there's still the need. And why should there be such a need after so many years? Well, one of the real challenges with policing in America is that we don't have a national policing system. We have approximately 18,000 police departments in this country, and each has its own protocols, written directive system, culture, and practices. And frankly, over the centuries, they have not been kind or had treated all people with respect and dignity. We have a history that in policing that is not all good. There are significant portions of it that we are not proud of. I started policing in 1970, trying to change some of those issues, where we knew that some of the use of force issues were not proper. Some of the issues, 4 things that we are dealing with today were not proper. We knew that individuals that they were finding guns under never carried guns. So we knew all the shootings were not bad, and all the issues that the police said were not correct. What today we have, and you would have thought we would move from this, but policing is just a subset of American culture. The institutional structural problems that exist in America exist in many, many police departments. Not most, but what you hear of is the worst examples, the videos that occur in America. I would suggest to you that in DeKalb County, we are a little better than that, or we're on the road to being significantly better than that. You have a leader, and one of the challenges with public safety and law enforcement is that the political leadership, the elected official on the local, the state, and the federal level must be responsible and must be held responsible by the citizens and residents. You have leader, Michael Thurman, character oriented government. How do we help citizens solve their problems, not disrespect citizens? With that, I think that the video stole a lot of the points that you were going to make. Communication is the best. The police have to treat our kids and citizens, and Generation Z is honest more than Generation baby boomers there. Young folks will tell the truth as they see it, and that upsets some folks. But you have to be polite. You have to be able to communicate with folks. You have to keep your hands where individuals can see them. You remember that, for instance, that officer wants to go home at night also, and we want you to go home. The issue, when a blue light comes on behind you, I've been doing this for 50 years now. I've been a police officer for 50 years, and the blue light still braces the hair on the back of my neck if it comes on. The issues, so we all have those feelings. When I joined 50 years ago, I was a UGA student. Had come out of a segregated school, segregated issues and all, and racism, knew it firsthand. But knew it in the police department firsthand. But then I was a Black man going into the police department trying to stop some of the issues that we thought were wrong. 50 years later, we still have some challenges in policing, but we have made it better. Each place that I've been, we've improved it. DeKalb has improved it. Do not make mistakes with officers. Don't get into a situation where it becomes contempt of cop. And I think I've probably taken my 4 or 5 minutes, or probably would be better at answering your questions. We have to be a police legitimacy. That's the basis of policing. If we're not legitimate, you're not going to participate in public safety. You're not going to help us. We cannot police your community without your consent. Therefore, we must do those things that reduce violence, that's violence within the community, and state violence. Thank you, Reverend, and thank you, congregation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chief Lumpkin. We are grateful for your guidance and how you shared with us so many of the wonderful things that we can do, and also beginning to unpack the system of the criminal justice system in America. I thought it was very enlightening, as you said, that there is no uniform system across America. And so each municipality operates within its own functionality, and that can cause so many problems in our society. And we'll continue this discussion and we'll have more questions as we go along. We're going to call now Chief LaSalle Smith, Sr., who also is a retired City of Atlanta Police Lieutenant and Pine Lake Chief of Police, and has over 50 years. He will come and he will share with us on tonight as well.
Thank you, Pastor Thomas, and thank you, Dr. Dozier, and all of the other guests that are on on the panel, as well as those in the audience of Zoom and Facebook. It is an honor for me to be here tonight. And Pastor, I really appreciate you, and I just want to applaud you for taking the initiative to have a forum of this magnitude, because we're living in two different pandemic situations. One is a pandemic, rather, and one is an epidemic. The pandemic, obviously, is the global pandemic with coronavirus, and the epidemic is that we're living in an epidemic of civil unrest in our nation, unfortunately. And what better time it is to address areas of this concern when that we know that African Americans are stopped by police at a disproportionately number than whites. And for instance, in DeKalb County, there were over 750,000 residents in DeKalb County. DeKalb County is 54% African American. And so you have a number of young people in DeKalb County who are out there driving, not only in DeKalb, but Fulton, Chatham County, and many other counties in the 159 county area of this state. And so we're looking at, in Georgia, for instance, there's 10.3 million people. And we look at the number of African Americans African Americans make up only 13% of the population in the United States of America. So police are stopping. We know that statistics say that police are stopping African Americans at an alarming rate, maybe 2 to 3 times higher than they are whites or other nationalities. And so I'm happy to have the young people on so that we can give them some kind of guidance. As Chief Director Lumpkin has said, I've been working in the field of law enforcement for 50 years myself, and I'm still working with a local law enforcement agency. And I just wrote a paper the other day and trying to get it signed off on, of implicit bias, that we need to train our office a little bit more. We're living at a time now when people talk about defunding police. In my opinion, it's just my personal opinion, we should not be defunding police. We ought to be training police more, because we're now finding that since African Americans are getting stopped at an alarming rate, and they're getting arrested or giving tickets more so than any other nationality, or whites particularly, we want to make sure that police are trained well. And so when we look at implicit bias, we all have biases. And some of those implicit bias, that means an implicit bias is that when a person is not conscious of that bias. And the explicit bias is when that person is conscious of the bias. And so everyone has a bias, but we know that there are police officers out there who have biases. And they're not all negative biases. As Director Lumpkin said, we have 18,000 different law enforcement agencies. There are 850,000 law enforcement officers in this country. And so when we look at that number of officers and looking at the number of people they are writing tickets, most of those are African Americans and young African Americans, and they have biases. And so we need to have training in our law enforcement agencies, more and more training to address the area of implicit biases. So, and I think, see, when I came on the streets in 1967, and that's of course before most of y'all were born, it was very difficult. When I came on, for an example, Black police officers patrolled the Black areas, all the Black areas of the city of Atlanta. We couldn't drive patrol cars, so we had to walk beats, and we didn't have radios. And so we had to have a call box. We had a call box, what we call downtown every hour, to make sure that we were still alive. And so technically we were doing community policing in the late 60s and the early 70s. And so what we need now is to make sure that we need to go back to doing community policing, where police and community can actually talk and sit down and have dialogue, and they will be able to get along better. And so we want our young people to understand that the police out now, 99% of the police officers are committed and dedicated persons. And so we only have that 1% that maybe are bad. And so we want to try to address those areas. And I think that implicit bias training is the key to having police and community come together more. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chief LaSalle. We are grateful for your discussion. One of the things that I heard you say clearly, and I heard you say several times, is the importance of training on the police side. I would also think that it would also be helpful for the community standpoint to do training with community and officers hand in hand working together, so it's not just that the police understand what their implicit and explicit biases are, but also that the public can understand what those biases are and how we can safeguard that and how we can help the police do a better job. And so thank you so much for sharing with us on those matters. At this time, we will have Sergeant April Moore, who is a sergeant with Fulton County Marshal Department. And she will come and she will continue this discussion with us on today. We welcome you, and please unmute. I see that you're muted. Unmute. There you go. And thank you for being here.
All right, greetings and salutations. Thank you for everyone that is here, this panel, to all the panelists, and for Ms. Dozier for inviting me to be a part of this panel. I've worked in law enforcement, of course, not 50 years. I'm 37 years old right now, but I'm in law enforcement for about 14 years now. And even in the time that I have been in law enforcement, I've seen some changes in what is going on in the law enforcement community. And there's a quote that I really love that says, if you do not have a seat at the table, then you're probably on the menu. And when I say that, I think about it in terms of law enforcement community and bringing people together to have a conversation. And sometimes when you have a lack of understanding, it will breed conflict, because you have people that are on both sides of the spectrum that have thoughts about what should happen and what are the best practices. So you have people in community that say, these are the things that we are experiencing. What can you do to address this problem? And you have people in law enforcement that say, hey, these are the things that we are experiencing. And whether it be local or national, how can we address this as a community? Well, number one, with the Marshal's Department, it's a little bit different what we do in our functions, because we have more of a directed mission. So we perform evictions, we execute warrants that have been signed off by judges. We also serve civil papers. However, there are a lot of programs that are out there. One that we do particular in our office is the GREAT program, the Gang Resistance and Education and Training program, which we do through schools, which of course now is a little bit different ever since coronavirus hit. That's kind of made everybody do a pivot right now. And I think with that pivot, it also provides a unique opportunity for us to have more of these conversations and not just make it a conversation and just to sit here and talk about it and say, hey, these are the things that I like, but then not walk away with actionable steps about what you can do to implement in your community to change the narrative is not going to help us. So I think, number one, for young people, it's important to look at building relationships, or just people in general. Whether you have a personal or professional relationship with someone, the opportunity for you to grow that relationship happens through conversation and communication on a consistent basis. So if you have a local police department, go to that zone, go to that police department, find out who the supervisors are, have that conversation, because if you or your child get into a situation, at least you know someone in that precinct that you built or established a relationship with. They also have programming like the Police Athletic League. And with the Police Athletic League, for young people, you have an opportunity to come in, not only learn about, basketball, sports and things of that nature, but there's also a policing side where you get to learn what officers do, go through some of our training. And that almost, instead of having a school to prison pipeline, you could have a school to public safety pipeline, because these are professions. Honestly, to be a law enforcement officer, the minimum requirement is a high school diploma, and the average person is in the metro Atlanta area is going to come out making anywhere from $40,000 to $45,000. That's an excellent opportunity for the youth in the communities to have gainful employment, but also be the change that they want to see in their local police departments. Some other best practices that I tell people, I'm also in internal affairs. So there are people that will say, hey, I had a problem with an officer and they never filed a complaint. Well, if you take, 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 incidents, and everyone that's come in contact with this person has not provided a complaint to the police department or the agency that this person works for, there's no way for the agency to know or have record that there's an issue. On top of that, let's say you do file a complaint. There are opportunities for people to file open records requests to go in to see who the officers are that are working in their areas, to see if it's something that they can address, or if there's a training issue that needs to be addressed with a specific officer, or if it's something that's department-wide that needs to be addressed on a consistent basis. When you talk about training, so I'm the chief coordinator for the Fulton County Public Safety Training Center. So that's what I do all day, every day, is train police officers to be the best. And that is my hope, and that is what I instill in them, and the other people that I work with instill in them on a constant basis. But when you think about training, I think one of the best trainings that could be added for law enforcement officers is a more robust cultural competency course. And I think if you have someone that is coming from Kennesaw or Canton or all the way down in Palmetto, or maybe up in Bartow County, and they've never lived in the community of Atlanta, they've never lived in the community of DeKalb County, they just come in to work and they go back home. If you do not understand the communities that you are policing, it's going to be difficult for you to really build relationships and be able to facilitate appropriate discussions, because that officer and or the people that they are working in community with, they don't have that common bond or relationship. So I think truly understanding the people that you work with is going to be a big factor in moving the needle on this. And I also say, because I have friends that work in social work, that work in psychology and counseling, things that are going on in law enforcement, sometimes it's not always a law enforcement issue. You have people that suffer from mental illnesses. You have people that really just need social work services, whether they need connection to educational resources, financial or economic resources, and other things. But because of these other systemic issues, it boils over into anger, frustration, and a lot of other things. So then what happens is people end up calling the police when really the crux of the problem really isn't a police issue. There are other things in communities that need to be addressed that are bigger than law enforcement, but unfortunately we're brought to the table. Now, to address the issue with some of the officers that do not display behavior that is consistent with what the oath that we take and to be in this profession, those things need to be addressed on a consistent basis and swiftly. So I think, even being here in Atlanta, for all the things that happen across the nation, of course it impacts us here and what we do, but we also cannot take the things that occur in other places and begin to apply those things to everything that's happening here. And what we can do is take those things that have happened and look at what we can do as a community to move the needle and to have that conversation so that we don't have those types of things happen in our area on a consistent basis. And again, me being in law enforcement, me being a Black woman, me having 2 Black boys, I have a 14-year-old who's, like 5'7", 5'8", and then I also have a 7-year-old. And my 14-year-old is at the point now where he's asking every day, hey, I saw this video, and he knows that I'm in law enforcement. So on one side, he's like, Mom, why are officers killing Black men? And on the other side, he's like, Mom, I want you to be safe when you walk out of the house every day, and I want you to make it back home. So that's something that we have to reconcile and talk about all the time. So I definitely understand it, and it's something that I have to balance on a consistent basis. But I definitely appreciative that God allowed me to be in this profession to have a voice and see, kind of like have a 360 angle of what is going on, to be able to try to change the narrative and make this better for everyone that's involved in the process.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sergeant Moore. I think you shared a lot of great things with us, and it's very interesting to hear how the conversation has transitioned, and from hearing about the need for training and understanding how that the policing from a national standpoint there is no manual on a national level. And hearing you talk about particularly training, and then also the need for cultural competency training, I think that is very, very helpful in what we're dealing with and how we're facing all of these issues that continue to rise. And we do understand things that happen in other parts of the country. They shouldn't affect us here, but they do affect us here, and they do have an impact on us right here in Atlanta. And so it's good to know that our officers are aware of that, and they are sensitive to that. And so thank you so much for sharing. This time we will have Dr. Nikisha Spruill, who is the assistant principal at Morningside Elementary. She will come now and she will give us feedback as an assistant principal and her interaction with her children at Morningside, and how those interactions, sometimes she sees them arrested or in criminal justice issues. And so we welcome her and we thank you for being here with us on today. You got to unmute.
Good evening. Thank you for having me this evening. I just wanted to talk basically from two perspectives. Being the mother of two Black sons, raising them, I've definitely had that conversation over and over again. Be respectful. Your job is to get home to me. I don't need you to try to defend yourself. I don't need you to tell a story. I don't need you to do anything but get home safely to me so you can tell me what happened so I can take care of it. And being an educator, most educators find that we have more children than the ones we gave birth to. The reality is all the ones that we interact with every day are our children. And let me correct something. Morningside is an elementary school, and I just started at that school. I'm leaving a middle school, so I'm going to talk from the perspective of middle school students. One of the things that I've noticed is, or one of the things that I feel is having an SRO in the building is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because we have to be safe. People are crazy, people are doing crazy things, and we need to protect the kids. So someone needs to be in the building that can do that for us. The reason I say it's a curse is because students see the police officer in their building every day, and they establish a relationship with them. And sometimes the relationship becomes familiar, and they play with them and argue, play with them, fuss back and forth, do things like that. And teachers having a police officer in the building, they like to call the police officer to the room to scare the kids. So when it's really a discipline issue that the teacher should handle, they will call the police officer before they call an administrator to have them come in there and kind of scare the kids. So they're scared of the police, but they're disrespectful. And one of the things that I had to tell the young boys, especially in our school, is you're disrespectful to these police officers, but they love you. They see you every day. They work with you every day. So their attitude about you is a little different from the ones that are out there on the street. I tell them all the time, you have to be respectful to the police officer here because the ones out there don't love you like this one does. And they don't know you like this one does. They don't know that you're playing. They don't know that this is how you talk every day. They don't know those things. And you're disrespectful to the one that's the one that's in your building every day. You feel like that same conversation can carry to a police officer that you encounter in the streets. So we tell kids to be respectful. And as parents, we have to be an example of respect. You can't just say be respectful. Parents come to the building disrespecting the administrators or the teachers or raising fuss, and the police officer has to get involved. And the kids see their parents doing that, so they feel like, hey, that's something I can do too. My mama did it, I can do it too. So we're at a crossroad here because we have to teach kids to be respectful, but we have to teach them what respect is. And the problem is they're disrespectful and they're afraid. And until we can get back to where when we were in school, the police officer was my pal, the fire person, the fireman is my pal. Those are the kind of things they taught me when I was growing up. That if you're in trouble, find a police officer. If something happens to you, find a police officer. I knew if I was lost to find a police officer. They were going to make sure I got back to where I was supposed to be. We're not doing that anymore. We're in an era of social media where we're showing kids, the police comes up to their neighborhood and the kid starts running and hiding. And social media lets us see all of these things, and these kids see all of these things. And so, they just have a fear that they don't understand. So what I hope that we can accomplish by having these conversations with these young people, it's not enough to say, be respectful. You have to show them what it means to be respectful, but you have to be respectful too. And that is my 10 cents.
Thank you so much. And we do understand that we do have to be respectful to the police. And as you alluded to, the use of social media, we see so many negative encounters with police as well via social media. And sometimes it does give us a misinterpretation of officers. And so it is really good to have so many persons from law enforcement with us today, giving us a positive example of their role in public safety, and also helping us to understand the true the issues that are at stake. This time we will call one of our own, Brother John Radford, who is currently a senior at the University of Georgia, and his major is political science. Brother John will come and he will speak on these areas as well. You're
okay,
muted.
hi everybody. So before I preface my conversation about what I think policing should be or what we should do in terms of like keeping our people safe, I want to preface this conversation by a conversation I had with my grandmother not even 2 days ago. And the whole reason we had the conversation was that I need to drive up to Athens back to my old school to get something that I left from when we all evacuated from the pandemic. And my car at the time on Monday was in the shop and I didn't have my own car. So my grandmother let me drive her car up to Athens. And my grandmother drives a brand new Mercedes-Benz. And before she gave me the keys to the car, her attitude was not that, the usual, oh, don't go too fast, stuff like that. Her conversation to me was, John, you are driving to Athens. In between Stone Mountain and Athens is some pretty rural parts of this state. You are a Black man driving a brand new Mercedes-Benz in the state of Georgia. I need you to be careful. And to me, as a Black man, having to be careful with the type of car that I drive, it makes me wonder, where we really are in this country as to why I have to be careful driving a car, or why a certain type of car would be indicator that I'm up to some criminal nefarious activity, when I can bet you any amount of money, no other white mother or grandmother have to have that same conversation with their white sons when they drive their Mercedes. And I'm hoping that when I have my own child, 30 years down the line, and I'm blessed enough to have my own Mercedes or BMW, and I let them drive it, that I don't have to have the same conversation with them. I've come to the point where I feel like in this country, we are still operating at two sets of rules, one set of rules for African Americans, one set of rules for white Americans. And as a person who's in political science, as a person who hopes to be a civil rights attorney, as a person who hopes to go up the ladder in social work and being with the public, hopefully being a public official working in government, I'm working more towards the systematic and systemic issues that cause this kind of disconnect. And I'm more for having it to where Black mothers and Black fathers do not have to have the conversation or have to have the talk with their Black sons or Black daughters anymore. So for me personally, I'm more interested on reinventing and reinvigorating what the community to police attitude looks like, to where we don't have to have the situation where we're concerned about our Black sons or our Black children being out in the streets encountering police and thinking that it could be a negative situation. Because I think it's sad in the first place that we have to have that video that was shown in the beginning of this program that teaches the 5 or 10 rules to encounter with law enforcement, when you can have white Americans who are being belligerent and being outlandish with cops, but they don't face the same punishment as if a black person was doing it. Now, of course, I'm not endorsing we should be belligerent to the police, but what I am saying is that I'm hoping that we can create a world where there's the same rules for everybody, that everybody has to have respect for police, or everybody has to follow the same rules to not be, at the hands of police violence. Because even when it's all said and done, even when Black Americans do the 10 rules of engaging with cops, there's still that possibility that they may, be dead. For example, George Floyd was not resisting. He was not unarmed. He was the perfect image of what a Black man should be, yet he was still at the hands of police brutality. You had a man like Philando Castile who did everything that white gun owners do, that said that, hey, policeman, I have my weapon, I have my concealed permit. I just want to let you know that this is what I have. And he still inevitably ended up being killed at the hands of police brutality. So I'm more interested in my life when I become a lawyer, when I become in my professional life. I want to get to the root causes of why we have the disconnect with police, because I feel like some of the solutions that we have up front are more of like band-aids to wounds instead of like actually healing the wound, actually recovering and actually creating a healthy and safe community for our Black and brown people. Because, when we look at policing, for example, I'm more looking towards, like, when it comes to crime, I want to get to the root causes of crime instead of like responding to crime. I want to maybe put more money into our communities, investing in our communities, giving jobs, because poverty and crime are intrinsically linked. If you want to reduce crime, then we must reduce poverty. I want to do more like the MLK approach of you must invest in your community, invest in poverty, reduce poverty, so Black and brown people can go up higher in their lives so they don't have to encounter police in the first place. And that's where my mindset and many young people's mindsets are at this current point in time. We're tired of it being, the same thing for over 40 and 50 years. And while we will concede that things have gotten better, I'm definitely living in a better time as a Black man than what my grandmother or grandfather faced. But I still feel like the same root causes that were true in the 50s and 60s and 70s are true in the 2010s and 2020s, and will continue to be true unless we break down to the real socioeconomic problems of what we're facing. So as a young Black man who's going towards, my career, I want to get down to the root causes of addressing poverty, addressing insecurity in our communities, so where we don't have to be encountered with the police in the first place, so we can all live happy and healthy lives. So where when I have children, I don't have to have the same conversation that my grandmother had to have to me 2 days ago about, you're a Black man in this certain type of car and you'll be looked at certainly by police. So I'm sorry for taking too much time, but that's where I'm looking toward more focus on my next couple of years of being in professional life.
Thank you so much, Brother John. Awesome job. You said a whole lot, and definitely we echo your remarks on today as a Black man, and we know what that feels like to be fearful of the car you drive, and I'm grateful for you sharing that with us, but also dealing with talking about getting to the root of the issue. And I think that is a major issue that we have to do as a community, as a country, is look at those root causes of crime. And so thank you for bringing that up. At this time, we will now begin to have some discussion, some Q&A discussion from those who are viewing on our live panel in the Zoom session. We invite you to turn your cameras on, and if you have any questions that you would like to ask, you turn your camera on, or if you would like to make a question, you can put it in the chat. If you're watching on Facebook or on our church website, you can put a question in there as well, and we will make sure that we get your question answered. This time, is there any other person? And I'm going to switch our view so we can see everybody in this discussion. And those who are on the panel list, feel free to jump right in and to give answers to the questions. So our young people, I know that some of our for young people? I know that some of our youth leaders have given you questions to ask, but what are some of the questions that you may have, or what are some feelings that you're having about this discussion that you can share with us on tonight as we talking about public safety and making it back home each night, or trying to avoid confrontation with police officers? What are some of the thoughts that are running through your mind, or some of the feelings that you may have in terms of this discussion on tonight?
I'll go first.
All right. Hey, Sister Jade.
Hi, I'm Jade Higgins Thomas. I'm a senior at GSMST, and I had a question for Chief Lumpkin. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Go ahead, Sister Jade.
Oh, okay. So Chief Lumpkin, during your main talking piece, during your discussion, you said that social media is showing the worst parts, or like the bad parts of the law enforcement system, and in DeKalb County, that social media isn't a really good representation of the law enforcement system in DeKalb County. I have a couple thoughts on that, but first I'd like to say that I completely agree with John. I think that instead of scrutinizing the people, or instead of giving advice to people who suffer, or a group who suffers from police brutality, is important. But I also think that the main problem is with the law enforcement system itself. I shouldn't have to walk out my house every day and be scared that I'm not going to make it home whenever I see a police car. Or if I were to get pulled over, I shouldn't be scared for my life. I shouldn't be scared to lose my life by someone who's supposed to be protecting my life. So my question is, do you believe that more training should be administered to police officers in terms of properly dealing with public citizens and how to de-escalate intense situations, such as the ones that we're seeing on social media today?
Certainly, I believe that more training is in order, but different training is in order. We cannot train officers only in the warrior mentality, teaching them how to be warriors. We have to teach them to be guardians. What police officers, their power really eminent from you and other citizens. We should be there to protect, to serve, and to build trust with you. We have to have the capacity to protect ourselves and protect you. Without being able to protect yourself, you cannot protect the citizens. But only about 5 to 10% of police functions deal with actual use of force or arrest. Our challenge, when I said that we see the worst, and that's what makes the news, is you don't see when police officers are engaging citizens in a manner that helps them. Our job is to help people solve their problems and protect them, not abuse them, not treat them with contempt. What I think what's missing in policing, and I think that training in most departments is great. When I came to DeKalb, one of the bragging rights was that we've got the toughest police academy in the state. Well, we don't want the toughest police academy. We want the highest quality, those that teach and train people in adult educational principles, and we produce officers who are guardians of citizens' constitutional rights. That's the reason they exist. Now, once you teach, just because you teach them does not mean it's going to occur. What you have to do, and I think this is in every police department that I've served for about a decade as a team leader on accreditation throughout this country. What's missing is supervision. If a person knows, if a person's life depends upon performing in a certain manner, and he or she can do that because their life depends on it, that's not a training issue. That's a will issue. Now, supervisors are the only ones that can ensure they do it and do it right. And policing and those, they have an issue because of their lives depend upon each other. We don't, as a vocation, and when I said we, I'm speaking of the 850 to 900,000. We don't hold each other accountable once we've made the tenure and the probation issues. Our supervisors have to be able and have to be willing to dismiss people who are not treating folks appropriately and properly. It can be done. And it has been done by some of the folks. I would like to think I'm one of them. I've arrested police officers for racial murders to drug issues over the 30 years or so that I've been a chief. It can be done, but you have to get back to that. Policing is a subset of American culture, and Mr. Rafford spoke to it. The institutional structural racism that exists produces issues of this nature. The issue about driving a vehicle speaks to it. Why should he, because of the hue of his skin, be subject to questioning for driving a Mercedes-Benz? But with those 18,000 police departments that his grandmother spoke of, there are some people that will suggest he's doing something wrong because he's driving a new Mercedes. Supervision is what's missing in policing. And that starts with the leadership of the political jurisdiction, the appointment, and in DeKalb is Thurman, CEO Michael Thurman. He won't tolerate it. But then most cops are good. You have to tell them what you stand for and what you will not stand for. And then they can go about doing their jobs in a fair, equitable manner. You have to teach them and train them in what the implicit bias is. We all have biases, but we've got to, that cannot be a decision point in when we're interacting with citizens. We have to hire more females. If you look at the research, we should have been, my mother said, anytime a job gets too tough, we turn it over to women to do it anyway, because we can't do it as males and we don't pay enough money to get it done well. The females perform better in use of force issues. They don't have nearly as many in the same, working the same beats as males. You have to look like your population. Well, sometimes we have to teach people museum. Many of our recruits have no idea what the old stories and the basis for some of the what we don't want, where they understand some of your questions.
Thank you so much for your response, Chief Lumpkin. Is there any other questions, young people or any person in the audience that would like to ask a question?
I was gonna ask the question, but Tyler looked like he wanted to ask first. So
You can go ahead. I'll ask after.
Okay, my name is Sydney. I'm a sophomore at DeKalb School of the Arts. My question, this is for any of the officers on the panel. Kind of piggybacking off of what Jade said, a lot of stuff that's going on with social media and the things that we see being put out there, I've seen a lot of people question how long officers have to train to actually become officers, and how long, you know, the process to become an officer actually takes. And they compare it to, you know, some of the other jobs that are supposed to save lives and help people feel safe. And then, so my question is, do you feel like the training period and the process of becoming an officer should be longer? Or do you feel like the, you know, the period of time that we have now is getting the job done? And then kind of like a second question is, do you feel like the training period the process of becoming. Okay, was somebody saying something?
Post,
No,
which is the
go ahead.
which is the peace officer.
Yeah, that's my question. Do you feel like the training period is, adequate, or do you feel like we could have it be a little bit longer? And my second question was, for Sergeant Moore, do you feel like the de-escalation training is like effective? Does like it really show results? And like, does like what exactly does that like process look like?
So to your first question in terms of training, so the Georgia Peace Officer Standard and Training Council requires 408 hours for a person to become a law enforcement officer in the state of Georgia. With that training, and any law enforcement officer can tell you, and it's a little bit different than either being a firefighter or becoming a nurse or any other type of profession, because what we do as law enforcement officers, a lot of times, honestly, you will not learn it until you actually get out there and get into the job. So there are some fundamental principles of engaging with people, doing investigations, and learning about the job itself. But so much of the job is actually doing the job and learning as you go. And unfortunately, sometimes the critical thinking skills that some folks may have or how they engage is not up to par. But I think that the training itself, because for example, the average law enforcement agency is going to be 408 hours, but there are some agencies, for example, DeKalb County, Clayton County, Atlanta Police Department, and there are a couple other police departments that have approximately maybe like 300 or 400 hours added onto their regular training schedule. So even with that, there are some agencies that go above and beyond what that minimum requirement is. But even with that, you could go through all that training and still never see some of the incidents that you experience once you actually get out in the field and start doing the job. I think that you really have to be flexible and prepared in a lot of ways to adjust and adapt once you actually get out into the field. Could there be more training? Definitely. There's always room for more training, but just like with anything, training is a perishable skill, and that kind of segues into de-escalation training. So we have a training called Crisis Intervention Team Training, and that is a 40-hour block of instruction that is outside of or it's supplemental to the 408 hours that's required to get your peace officer certification. And that's specifically to teach law enforcement officers how to deal with some experience, either an acute or a chronic mental health crisis, and how to connect that person to resources, understand what's going on, and look at ways to engage with them that does not result in an arrest for that person, but maybe connecting them to Georgia Regional or some other, making sure they're taking their medication and other things like that. I think de-escalation training, again, is good, and we can go through scenarios and do all that stuff. But if it's not something that's used on a consistent basis where you're learning how to employ those skills in real world scenarios, that skill becomes perishable. And it's a quote that I give my students the first week that they start training, that really talks about, contrary to popular belief, you will not rise to the occasion. You will sink to your lowest level of training. So whatever you train for on a consistent basis, when you get into something, that's where you're going to revert back to. So I think it's not necessarily the type of training that officers are receiving. It's more so the frequency of that training and them being able to employ it on a consistent basis. But for a law enforcement agency, they also have to look at being able to have people in place to be able to do the job. So it's a lot that goes into it, but I do think that the training itself is good. It's just doing that training on a more consistent basis to be able to employ it in skills where, in situations where it's very fast and unfolding, and you don't have time to really think about it.
Thank you so much.
Let me speak to this just a moment. Georgia has a horrendous standard of 400 hours of basic training. You could not take that.
Let me gas up. I'm going to do that.
And be competent that basics would not give you a competent officer in Metro Atlanta County per se. The DeKalb takes over 1,000 hours from the basic training. The Georgia requirement to have 20 hours or so of annual training is outdated. But Georgia has a system where the political structure of, and this goes back to Mr. Radford's point, the political structure still mirrors to a certain degree the old county unit system. And that does not suggest that we will get to be competent. The Georgia sheriffs control the quantity of training that people are going to receive. I brought crisis intervention training, the 40-hour course to this state in 1998. And then by 2005, we had every Athens Clarke County police officer trained as a crisis intervention basic with the 40 hours. We introduced video cameras in 2010, and we had a system of accountability where sergeants had to check X amount of times per week. You've got to have a systematic approach to weeding out problems, and individuals have to know that you're going to check. You have to have appropriate training, but you also have to have appropriate supervision, and you have to train supervisors to that. And you have to break that issue about, yeah, he just fails in certain areas. That cannot be the rule going forward, or it hurts people.
Thank you so much. We have a few questions, and we're going to come back to our online audience. We have a few questions that have been asked from those who are watching on Facebook. One question that we want to ask at this time is by Reverend Wallace. How long is training for police officers in police academy? I think that question was answered, but this is the second part of the question. Are they required to obtain CEUs annually? On an annually basis, are they required to forego and go back into training annually? And any one of you can answer that question.
I was going to say, he kind of addressed that. So the state of Georgia only requires 20 hours of training. And in 2016, they required, as a part of that 20 hours, that you do a community policing, and that you also do de-escalation training as a part of that. And again, sometimes that 20 hours is difficult for some officers to get just based on work schedules. And if your agency runs 24 hours, and the number of people that you have to take off to be able to get into training, because most agencies are not fully staffed. But that is the standard. It's only 20 hours per year. But there are several officers that do exceed that 20 hours a year, but the state only requires 20 hours per year. And part of that is also firearms training as well.
Okay, thank you so much. We have another question online that I'm going to ask, and we're going to get back to our online panelists. We have a lot of questions that are coming through, and we're going to try to get to as many as possible. We may not be able to get to all of them on tonight, but we're going to try to do our best to get to as many as possible. The next question, Nkosi Key asks, he asked the question, can you give us some tangible examples of police serving in nonviolent purposes?
So, I mean, you can go ahead, Chief Duncan.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I'll follow.
I'll say, number one, just me specifically, outside of being called out when there is an issue per se where someone, it will result in arrest. So, for example, I had a situation where I just happened to be going to get something to eat, and I was coming back to the police academy, and I'm not sure if you guys remember, there was a bus that flipped over on Camp Creek Parkway. It was approximately 50 people that were on the bus. I just happened to be the first officer there because I was coming back from lunch. And to see a scene like that where people have been thrown out of a bus and people are still trying to get out, and the bus was pinned on top of someone, immediately went into action trying to, number one, block traffic, trying to assist the people, get coworkers to be able to get down there to where people were. You have situations where people have experienced some very traumatic events, whether it be, you know, sexual abuse or any other, maybe a financial crime. There are a lot of situations that call for police to come in to investigate, but it does not arise to a situation that requires us to either arrest someone or use force in any way.
Pastor, I have a comment.
I would cite, you know, as the she spoke to the motor vehicle crashes. You have cops that rescue people in different situations, from drowning to fire. Sometimes when we beat the fire department there, the food distributions that the CEO is sponsoring currently, and Saturday we'll have cop staffing areas where we'll be given, DeKalb County will be given back to school supplies and produce and chicken out. What if the police are going to demonstrate their legitimacy? They must engage citizens in more than just enforcement related activity. If you see us just always wrestling and scuffling with someone, my grandson wouldn't like me, and I have 3 of those. And I want to be able to produce a world where my 3 grandsons and from age 3 weeks to 22 can drive the vehicle, maybe not a new Mercedes like Mr. Rafford, but my grandsons look more like Mr. Rafford than they do with me.
So
so
I have.
Go ahead, Sister Tina.
Thank you. So my thing is, do we really need training on how to treat people humanely? Because some of these officers are treating people inhumane. And so how much training do we need for that? And I think that the police department should be defunded, and those funds should be allocated to mental health and some other positive organizations that will reinforce different outcomes with the community.
All right, we're going to ask Sergeant LaSalle to respond to that question, please.
Yes, I understand, and we're looking at a lot of things that are occurring. Police and community working together in social media situations. In the agency that I work for right now, I work in internal affairs and training, and we have a small amount of officer misconduct. Now, I'm not saying, but naturally, the larger the agency, probably the more incidents of police misconduct we see. But what we are advocating is that police working together closer with communities. As Chief Lunkman has just said, we are often out in the communities giving out food. We are out playing with the kids. We're teaching classes at the elementary and middle schools, and we are showing them that police officers are human beings. A lot of people don't look at police officers as being human beings. They're looking at just, they're there to lock me up. And that is not the objective of a law enforcement officer, just to lock people up and throw away the key. And what we're trying to do, we want the people to understand that we're just human beings, just like you are. You know, we have families, we bleed red blood, you know, we go out respective churches and other faith-based institutions. We have kids in school, we have grandkids. I have 5 grandkids, and I have to talk to them often. Don't be afraid of the police. They're not there to harm you. They're there to make sure that you go home every day from school, or while you are playing, that you are going back home to your parents. And so we want people to see us in that light, that we're not there to harm you. We're not any big giant animal on the street. And so I know we're seeing a lot of things on social media, and I was just looking at some figures the other day that in America, we have 247 million people on social media. And we're talking about a population of 330 million people in the United States. And there's 3.8 billion people on social media in the world out of 7.5 billion people. So I try to, when I preach sermons and I teach classes all the time at my employment. And what I try to get them to understand, we've got to make a better, present a better picture and a more positive picture to the community. They want to see us in the light other than locking up somebody, you know, because as I said, that is not the objective of law enforcement agencies. So that's what we try to do, to be much more community oriented.
All right, thank you so much for responding to that, Sergeant LaSalle. At this point, we're going to go back to Tyler McKellar. He had a question earlier, and we wanted to come back to him and get his question.
Yes. So first, my name is Tyler McKellar, and I'm a senior at GSMST. And first, I wanted to say that for the information here, it is all very useful. And my question kind of relates to it is that knowing that young people like us are getting this information when there are other adults or officers coming to the school and talking about it, I've come to realize that we don't, well, some of them don't really retain it as well, except when like somebody, like their friend or another young person goes to them and talks to them about it. So my question mainly to Sergeant Moore is that what ways can we get information to give it to them? Because it's just a way, it's a mental thing I just realized.
So I need you to clarify your question just a little bit for me. What ways can you get information about how to interact with law enforcement officers? Is that the specific question?
It's more of which ways can we get, sorry if my question's a little
okay.
off, but the question is how can young people help other young people retain information better?
Okay. So I would say the best way that most people learn, especially when you're younger, is to run scenarios. We call them what if scenarios. So if you set up a situation where it's like, okay, you know what? Because I work with a program called SCORE, Shaping Careers and Officers and Relating Experiences. And we had high school boys from Benjamin E. Mays football team that we were working with. And we were in the school library. This was last year sometime. And we set up a scenario. We put 4 chairs and we set up a scenario where we had one of the officers pretending to call in 911, say, hey, you know, I see some, 4 black males driving down the street in a car. I've never seen them in my neighborhood. They look suspicious. And I think one of them might have a gun. Now, whether or not the person saw that or that happened, that's what they reported to the 911 operator when they called. So of course, when police arrive and get in the area, they're on high alert because they were this person may be armed. So we had the students act out how they would react. And we approached the vehicle like we normally would if we were doing a traffic stop. And we had those moments where you said, okay, stop. So let's talk about why you chose to do this and why you chose to say this and why you felt like this, and give those opportunities to have the teachable moments without the stress of actually being in the presence of a law enforcement officer and having the real situation. And I would encourage you, any police department and even me or anyone on the call would be more than happy to come in if you wanted to build out scenarios, to have those conversations, just to make sure that people are a little bit more comfortable. Because again, you're going to sink to your lowest level of training. And so if your lowest level is I'm in fear and this is how I react in fear, that's what's going to happen when you get in that situation. So I think really just building out scenario-based questions and, you have that scenario, whether it's like, okay, you got caught out and you were by yourself, it was late at night, whatever the situations they would normally experience, and try to put that in a scenario that they can go through and really critically think through and not have the stress of actually being in front of a law enforcement officer and it happening in real life would be helpful in them retaining it because they had something versus someone telling them something. They actually experienced it and went through the process.
All right, thank you so much. We have a question from Facebook from Dr. Mark Thompson. And this question is, what is the depth of psychological profiling as well as sociological training that police officers go through as a part of their training. And we're going to ask Chief Lumpkin to answer this question, if you will, please, sir.
Will you repeat the question, please?
What is the depth of psychological profiling as well as psychological training that police officers go through as a part of their training?
The psychological profiling, if the question is regarding do they have a psychological screening prior to entering the police field, that's not a requirement for most police departments. It is in DeKalb County, but it is in those departments that have gone through Georgia certification. But I think it's around 100 that have gone through Georgia certification of the 400 or 500 departments in the country. I mean, in the state. Psychological screening, and we have psychologists that actually do the screening on a contractual basis. They aren't employees of the police department. The other part of the question, I'm not certain I understand exactly. Can you help me where you think the direction there is?
So let me go back to the question.
We screen.
I'll jump in, Pastor Thomas.
Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead, Dr.
I think what Pastor Thompson is speaking of is the psychological profiling, that where they are profiling that Black person they see in that car. And I think Reverend LaSalle spoke to that a little bit, and the sociological, that we are now in a neighborhood that's high crime. And what is that person? Or we're in a wealthy neighborhood. Why are they driving through? So the sociological, based on the community, the neighborhood, what the person looks like, a psychological profiling happens. As a social worker, I know that is done, not just, it's done in the classroom. I know Dr. Spruill knows that that's done within the classroom. Teachers are sent to a school, they're not comfortable. And we had one of our own members, Orlando Baylor, also raised the question about the kind of whether or not, we should be modeling after a city like Camden, I think, in New Jersey, that they have to live in their community. But
Right.
Reverend LaSalle, how would you, I know you've done some writing about this area as well. Is that still going on, and how do we address it? I know that Sergeant Moore talked a little bit about that training too, but Lieutenant LaSalle Smith, unmute.
Yes. We are right now in America basically advocating more training for law enforcement agencies in implicit biases, because as I said initially in my response is that each of us has biases, and you brought up a very good point that oftentimes, and I kind of, when I talk to officers, I say, well, do you police in Buckhead as you would police in Bankhead? And they said, well, yes, we do. But they don't understand at that point that they may have a particular bias, and they may see an African-American who's not dressed what they call up to par. And they profile that well, he's a burglar, or he's a robber. But we don't know anything about the individual. So we've just got to try to train our officers to get rid of those biases, or not let that bias interfere with their job responsibilities. Because we have to look at people as human beings, regardless of the way they're dressed, regardless of their gender, regardless of their religion, or whatever the bias they're having. And a lot of these police officers don't understand that they have a bias. And so we're trying to get them to recognize their particular biases so we can address those areas and to make it a lot more easier for them to police in various communities.
I agree with LaSalle 100%. One of the things we did about 18 months ago, we changed the order of our preferences in terms of where we're pulling officers from. It's DeKalb first. So we're trying to reduce that stigma of the person living significant ways away and that has no understanding of the cultural diversity of DeKalb County. Metro second, the rest of Georgia, and then others. Do you police in Buckhead as well as the way you do it in Bankhead? We don't, our jurisdiction now nationally, none of this is essentially applies. Remember, you got 18,000 jurisdictions out there with very few that are nationally certified. Very few meet those type of standards for psychological basic testing. Very few do psychological testing after critical incidents. So it's, you have to drill down to the department. Certainly sociological profiling occurs. 40 odd years ago when I was working undercover, we did a scenario within the DeKalb County Police Department. And I played the part of a Black Panther and another white officer played the part of a student for Democratic Society. And we did not receive a very good welcome, even after they understood we were undercover cops.
We just have to have more scenario-based training. I think that's the key to this whole process, to have more scenario-based training, because, you know, as I said, police officers just like anybody else. When they come to classrooms, many of them are tired. They work extra jobs so they can provide for their respective families. And so we want to make sure that we can have more scenario-based so they can actually interact, can actually, like as we call it, OJT. And so they would become a little bit more interested in what they're seeing, and actually be able to digest all of the material a little bit better, in my opinion.
And I want to
thank you so much.
I want to inspect those video cameras and make sure we supervise and that they are actually implementing the training.
Yes, absolutely. That's critical.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant LaSalle. At this time, Sister Paula Higgins Thomas, do you have a question that you want to ask as a parent?
Yes. There's been a lot said tonight and everything. But I applaud the person on Facebook who talked about the psychological element of training, because it's so pivotal to the officer's role in the community, particularly dealing with the situation today with the crisis between the police, because I see it as a crisis between the police and young African American men and women in our community. Now, my question is to the police officers directly. You're working in an environment where you have an officer who happens to be a white officer who you know is abusing their position of power. I'm just asking a question as an example. And he's your colleague, but you know there's water cooler talk, there's locker room talk, that they were out the night before and they had an incident which involved an African-American man where he was either arrested or beaten up. What do you do about it? What is your escalation process to deal with these indecencies against Black men and women in our community? Because I'm quite sure this situation, as we all know, happened overnight. It wasn't just a situation that's just emerged in the 21st century. This has been going on for 50 years non-stop. We have a National Black Association of Police Officers, I believe, or if there is one. My interaction with the police is limited, but my question is, what is your escalation process to deal with these inadequacies in the police force? And what are you doing to stop it? Because we do have a significant number of Black officers in the police force. Yeah. And when these things are happening, what is going on? What are you doing? Are you sitting, I'm not saying you're sitting in silence, but what are you doing about it?
Well, you know, I can tell you as an investigator in Internal Affairs, which is the Office of Professional Standards, and we focus on. We're not trying to lock police officers up, but we want to address if there's officer misconduct, and we have to depend upon the citizens as well as police officers to actually bring the information to us so that we can go out and investigate and to make a determination if there was misconduct involved in any incident. That's why it is so critical. I hate to keep harping on this. Implicit bias is critical, and in the 21st policing response, they are advocating that. And I've just read an article that Noble, I am the chaplain for the Georgia chapter of Noble, and we're talking about now the key is to remedying some of the injustices that people are seeing is that we got to address the implicit bias. We have to teach them. We have to actually give more and more hours to it. Our officers now get 40 hours every year in training. And I am asking the head of the agency that we need to increase the training in implicit bias. We just cannot spend an hour trying to teach a police officer about his or her biases. We've got to have more and more training on that.
Yes, but in response to your question, we have also police officers who's been on the force for 20, 15 years, who have been consistent in their actions, and complaints have been brought against them, but yet still they continue to carry out the abuse. And as a member of the audience said, what is the psychological evaluation of these officers when they carry out these acts? What is being done about it? How are they still deemed fit to go back out onto the street to police, knowing that they've got 8, 9, 10 instances where a complaint is coming about how they're treating particular members of the community of color?
So I'll kind of interject to that question. The first thing I'll say is, based on the way your question is phrased, there's an assumption that that is something that we experience personally. So it's something that you may see reported in the news, like what just recently happened with the George Floyd incident, right? But me, I've been in law enforcement for 14 years. I've worked in internal affairs for 10 years, and never once have we had an incident that rose to that level. And never once in my career have I worked with an officer, white, or any other race, that I have witnessed engaging in acts against an African-American or a Black male that I, had to step back and say, hey man, you can't do that. You can't act like that. So that's, I guess I want to preface it by saying that first, that I haven't personally experienced that. But the second thing is, I think it's important to create a safe and open space for people to feel comfortable to even have that conversation. So recently, just as recently as today, I had a student, we were doing a simple task. I was trying to unlock a door on a trailer. And when they talked me for about 5 minutes trying to unlock the door, and I called the person that sent me out there with the key, went to the back door. And so my student said, well, Sarge, he said, I knew that key didn't go in there. I knew it was on the back. I said, well, why didn't you say anything? He said, well, Sarge, you've been doing this longer than me. So I just figured, I would let you do it because you probably knew better. And I told him, I said, this is the exact reason people are having situations now. I said, if you see someone doing something that's incorrect, you need to address it then. I said, because now you see me here 5-10 minutes. I said, what happens when you get into an incident and you see someone doing something wrong? I said, are you going to sit back and not say anything and say, oh, I knew this was the right thing to do, but you've been doing this longer than me, so I'm not going to say anything. So I think it comes back to number one, people understanding when they go through the police academy that you still have a voice to talk about your concerns. If it gets to a point where you're not comfortable with that, you need to go to another level to address that, because that is more than just that officer doing something bad. That's a systemic issue in that police department and a culture that has been crafted around allowing people to do that. So it's really incumbent upon the officers that are in that space to really step up and say, you know what, this is not right, and I'm going to do something about it. And we cannot, like me personally, nobody can make me go say, this is what I saw. I have to have the impetus to be like, you know what? I saw this is wrong. I'm going to do something about it. So having people that have that integrity and the morals to be able to step up and say, this is what I saw wrong, is the type of people that we want to have. And unfortunately, sometimes we don't feel like people have those, we don't know people don't have those morals until we get into the situation. But we definitely try to weed people out through that process as we go through the hiring process. But unfortunately, some people slip through the cracks. But it's really incumbent upon that officer when they see something wrong to address it. And if it goes through the chain and it is not addressed appropriately, for them to go to the next level, whether it be the Georgia Peace Officer Standard and Training Council or some other kind of citizen review board to address that issue. But it's incumbent upon them to walk into the situation knowing that they can make the change if they say something.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. At this time, we're gonna call Travis Robinson. He's gonna ask a question, and then we have a few more that we're gonna get to before we end tonight. Travis, are you there?
Yes, I'm there, and I apologize. It's kind of dark out here in South Carolina, but this has been a good conversation, but it's left me optimistic, and it also left me pessimistic at the same time. When we hear stuff about Blacks being over policed and 3 to 4 times likely, to be arrested for committing same crimes as other races, and then you hear stuff that police officer will address, when there's an issue that they might go to their lowest form of training. Then we talk about training as the issue, and then we say that their supervision is another issue with policing. I guess the thing that I start doing is saying, well, this seems like a systematic issue of policing communities. So I wanted to ask the panel, what do they think if there was a community? So because I'm an educator, and I think one of the ways that we try for the public not to be disengaged into the education that their child receives is by having a school board, which is pretty much just regular people, citizens that's able to, co-sign on educational decisions that's made on the behalf of their child. I just think that what my question is that should there be some type of community oversight over policing to help address these types of issues? Because we still have to recognize on the historical standpoint that policing has been a part of our oppression as well. I can remember my grandfather always talking about when he goes into rural areas and how police officers put guns in their faces. I can remember when I was 18, 19 years old, I'm just walking down the street and I get a gun put in my head by a law officer. So there's a lot of trauma, that people of color experience at the hands of police officers. So, for us to be able to, go to the path to talk about solutions, if you don't think that a community oversight is a proper solution, then what would you guys suggest would be a way to holistically change the way that policing is done, not just in Georgia, but across the country?
I personally said it before, it's bigger than the issue with law enforcement. I think it's a systemic issue when you have to bring all the people to the table, more than just community in terms of citizens that are being policed, but you have social workers, you have doctors, you have, just the medical industry, psychologists, counselors. I think that all of the issues that Black people have experienced, and it's institutionalized in a lot of almost everything that we do on our day-to-day lives. So I think bringing everyone to the table to build out a plan, because addressing issues with healthcare, there are people that call 911 because they need headache medicine, because they don't have healthcare. There are people that call 911 because, they may have, they're experiencing financial issues, and that leads to anger and frustration, which leads to domestic violence issues. So it's like, I believe that bringing all of these people to the table, not just community and really having a conversation, but that's something that is not, a 1 day, a 1 month, a 1 year. This is something that has to be ongoing, and everybody coming to the table to talk about what they can bring to address the issue. It's not just, let's talk to the police about what they're doing, because we're still going to get the calls if you don't address all these other issues that are going on in our communities.
Thank you so much. At this time, we're going to continue the questions. We're going to come to Mark Hayes. He has a question that he wanted to ask.
Just before Mark goes on, let me just thank our Sergeant Moore. I know you have another engagement, Sergeant Moore. You were phenomenal. We're going to call on you again.
Thank you.
Let me give a shout out. She's also a marathon runner for everyone. And let me give a shout out to one of our women organizations. She's a member of Delta Sigma Theta. So thank you. And our other Dr. Sproul had to also move on to another Zoom, who's a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. So we had two of our phenomenal women's groups here. Thank you. And we wish you all the best. Stay safe. We're going a little longer than we had planned, but Pastor's in charge, and we have young people who want to speak. So I think we're going to try to get them in. Pastor?
All right. Mark, are you ready? Mark, you still there? All right, we're gonna come back to you, Mark. This time, I think Tyler and John, you both had some questions that you wanted to ask.
Yes, I did, real quick. So, to a little background knowledge on my background information on my question. I go to a school that most likely has all races there. So the versus a school that's predominantly Black. What do you think would be more of a priority, to focus on the schools that are predominantly Black, high schools that are predominantly Black, or the schools that have that are more mixed in race?
As far as what?
Just as far as like information based, being ready for situations and encounters and all that.
I would say, at least in my opinion, that we should address a mixture of races of people. Let me give you an example. I was the first gang specialist in the Southeast back in 1982, and there is I guess the mindset of some people that all African Americans belong to gangs, and that is not true at period. There are 1.3 million gang members in the United States of America, and they are a composite of all races of people. And so I think if we have a mixture of people and they want a races of people, we can address the issues of whatever their concerns are right there, and we can speak to the whole populace of the of people there at that time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lieutenant LaSalle, for answering that question. This time, Mark is back. Mark, are you ready? He has a question that he wants to ask.
Yes, sir. Well, I had an incident about a year ago. I was up in West Virginia, and I'm a Boy Scout, so I was in West Virginia for what do you call it? It was a Boy Scout jamboree. So I was probably it was a lot of races there, but I was mainly like the only Black person in that big group of white people. So they would start, mosh pits, getting wild and stuff, and they told people not to do it. Out of everybody, they pulled me out and pulled me. They cornered me. They grabbed me by my arm. They was like, "Where your ID at?" They kept asking where my ID at. They kept asking me, "Am I supposed to be here?" And my response, I answered them, respectfully. I de-escalated the situation because they was getting a little, they was kind of trying to escalate it. They was yelling, kind of raising their voice. I was just calm. I was just, kept my cool. So at the end of the day, I feel like I don't want to say it, and I hope things could change, but I don't feel that things are changing in this world, and it's just people have a lack of history, and so history will always repeat itself. Nobody know their history. So I just feel like I just really want to know what's the point of all this if you don't educate each other about all this stuff that's going on in the world?
Chief Lumpkin or Lieutenant Sally, you want to try to answer Mark's question?
I think they pulled them out of the group because they were experiencing implicit bias issues. They looked at the color of his skin, they looked at probably the way he was dressed, and until we can rid ourselves of those biases and do not let our biases interfere with our daily employments, our daily goings and comings, we're not going to get any better. And so I think if we can address that in a forum where we have a mixture of races of persons, I think we can address that issue successfully.
One of the challenges I see, what you described, we probably have the implicit bias there, but you also have just a straight out explicit bias.
Right.
We still have racism. We still have structured racism in this country. I differ with you that in terms of it is getting better. The last 8 years or so may not seem like that. There was a reaction to the election of President Obama. There was a big pushback. It frightened a lot of Americans, in my opinion. And then we come up with the current president, which has certainly been a challenge and fuel some of the racism in this country. To be kind with it. So implicit bias, explicit bias, some people think that they can just return to the ways of the 40s and 30s and Jim Crow issues. We are making progress. We're making progress as long as that we've got young people like that's on this call thinking about how they're going to change the world. Our millennials, our Generation Zs are the best that we've ever produced. And you all will carry our country further than any generation before you. Don't ever give up. Don't ever think that you're not making progress. Some of us used to have to say, when in the 60s, when we were in the school there, we would die and go to H before we would let certain things happen. And we accomplished some things. If you're losing the number of Black folks that we're losing today to violence in terms of, and if you look at it, it's about 1,000 people annually. Of that, 300 to 400 are Black. But we don't even have a national standard that people have to report the number of use of force or the people who are dying. But we think it's between 300 and 400 Black people, and we're about 13% of this population. Disproportionately, Black folks are killed at a higher rate. Brown folks are killed at a higher rate. The police in this country really have about a 64% positive rating, one of the highest in the country, but not amongst Black and brown. Because of the issues that have occurred historically from the 1700s forward. We don't have a great history. And but the only way to change a lot of things is to change the structure of America in terms of how it produces its systems. I think Mr. Rappert is correct. We have systemic structural problems that the governments must address. And we have this divide. Go back and look at history. Georgia history was based on the county unit system. And I was a young man, not a youngster like many of you all when it was outlawed, but I still see the significant impact of the county unit system on Georgia everyday systems. And until we get rid of that, we're going to have problems.
We're going to take two more. I got one question from Amar, and Sydney's going to put her question in the chat so I can read it out. And Amar says it's not really a question, but it's advice. I'm getting my driver's license in a week or two. So I just wanted to know what advice would you give me for driving, or if I ever get stopped based on the point of where we're in. So if you ever get stopped by the police officers, what's some advice that you can give them?
Remember the 3 Ps. The 3 Ps is to remain poised, remain polite, and be prepared to present your driver's license. You cannot win by having a confrontation with the police officer on the street. Police officers are human beings, just like they want, as Chief Lumpkin is so eloquent said, they want to go home to their respective families just like anyone else does. And so they're out there to do a job. They're 99% of the police officers out there on the street, they're not out there to harm you. They are out there to help you in the best way that they possibly can. Everybody does not have the same personality, obviously. And so many of these police officers on the streets, they're tired, they worked extra jobs, some of them work 2 extra jobs, and they're just basically trying to make both ends meet. But they're out there not to harm you, they're out there to help you as much as they possibly can. So just remember those, when you get ready to get stopped, remember those 3 Ps, stay poised, be polite, and be prepared. And I guarantee you will come out successful.
And if you pull over in the vehicle, if it's at night, reduce your speed initially. If you're a female, reduce the speed. Don't stop if you can't determine whether it's a police car. Slow it down. Drive to a well-lit place. Turn your light, your interior light on. Officer can see in there. Put your hands on the steering wheel. Don't exit the vehicle. Keep your hands where he or she can see it, and stay in your driving seat. Do the 3 Ps as Chief LaSalle has said. Be polite. Don't reach for anything. We carry guns, and one of the things that we have to do is to make certain that I put my hand up on the steering wheel, but I also tell the person I've got a gun in the car and where the gun is.
Thank you so much. This was an awesome discussion tonight, and we are so grateful for all of our panelists who have participated and have shared.
I was just gonna say before you, and I do have my question, but it was kind of long for me to type. So do you want me to just ask it or still send it to you?
Yeah, go ahead and ask your question, please. And then this is the final question, and we're going to close out for tonight. I've been texting with Dr. Dozier, and we are going to plan some more forums just like this, so we can have interaction with law enforcement. And so all is not lost tonight. You will be able to have your question answered at a later time. We'll hear from Sydney, and then we're going to do our closing remarks for tonight.
Okay, can I make one remark about the cap before we close?
Yes, sir. That's fine. Go ahead, Sydney.
Oh, okay. My question kind of ties into what Ms. Paula said. And I'm really just trying to determine like what's being like real information that's being put out on the internet and like what's rumors. So I've seen a lot of like people coming out saying, or like retired officers saying that officers can't speak out against their fellow officers because of something called a blue wall agreement. So I just wanted to know if that's true. Is there like something that officers sign or like something they agree to that says like they can't call out like online or like on social media their fellow officers? And I've had like people say that they tried to do so and they were fired, or they even gave an example where somebody was put into a mental institution because they kept trying to prove that one of their like coworkers was, you know, doing wrong on the job. And then this is like a, you know, just a second really short question. Do you think it's fair that officers determine the consequences of their fellow officers? Because I just think that when you are a police officer and you're out on the job, you are putting your life on the line and you're trusting your coworkers with your life, that when you go out that, you know, you can depend on them. And when you're in a situation where you may be in danger, that you have that type of bond where you rely on each other. So is it really fair that officers, like, you know, like a chief will get to decide if an officer gets suspended or if they, you know, get fired? Or is it like a deeper process than that? Because, you know, that just doesn't seem fair if that's the case. So that's all I had to say.
Years ago, in the early stages of policing, that was what they was called a code of honor among police officers. And I don't advocate that at all. I tell people, just like a crime, if you see something, say something. If one of your coworkers are doing something and you know that it's wrong, bring it immediately to the internal affairs section of the police agency. And if you see a citizen see something that you know is wrong or unethical in any manner, contact the police internal affairs, or contact the police chief or the police commissioner, whomever is ahead of the agency, and report it immediately. Now, I tell officers right now, and I teach internal affairs classes, and I said, there is no code of honor when a police officer is doing something wrong. If a police officer is engaging in terrible conduct, report him, and I promise, or report her, and I promise it will be investigated, and the appropriate discipline will be taken, including termination if necessary. In the United States, you know, since 2015, there's out of 800,000 police officers, there have been about 35 police officers who were actually charged and convicted of a crime. And so we want our police officers to act with integrity and professionalism at all times, and we want them to be, more importantly, be honest with the public. And so we want them to actually exhibit the proper conduct and professional conduct at all times. We want the maximum amount of integrity exhibited by our law enforcement officers out there.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant LaSalle. At this time, go ahead, Chief Lumpkin.
We want you to know, and we want the police officers out there to know, that we know that 99% of them are doing what they think is right in trying to serve and protect you. We're not perfect. We're just like the rest of American society, regardless of the vocation of the profession. We have some people who've gotten in who should not be there. That takes supervision and management to rid them of it. Is there a such thing as the blue line or blue wall of code or honor? Yes. It should not exist. It's supported by what they call the radio going dead. If you need help, you may not get it because no one hears you call for help. We cannot have that. Good police departments do not allow that because of the leadership in the police department. They have to have the courage to confront and design systems that get at those who might want to abuse, who might want to do inappropriate things, who might want to do illegal acts, and do it in a thoughtful, reasonable manner that does not expose the officers who are confronting their peers. You may have heard of something called 8 Can't Wait that came out of Mr. Floyd's death in all. DeKalb, we were practicing all 8 before they were voiced nationally. One was not codified in writing, but was being taught. That is the duty to actually intervene and not allow things like what occurred to Mr. Floyd to occur. You got a right, you got a responsibility to stop that mess and not allow someone to put their knee on the neck of a person in that manner. And we had that outlawed before it occurred, but we have to enforce it and line people. Remember that most officers, 90th percentile high, want to actually serve you. We are 61% of minority officers. I was a black male before I put that uniform on 50 years ago. I'll be a black male when I take that uniform off there. I've got children, grandchildren, my son, 2 daughters, 3 grandsons, and a granddaughter that I want this world to treat differently than it treated me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lieutenant LaSalle and Chief Lumpkin for responding. This has been a very fruitful presentation and discussion on tonight, and we're so grateful for all of our participants being on tonight, as well as those who've been in the audience and asked some important questions on tonight. It is 9 o'clock, and we've been on this for 2 hours, and we do understand and know that we need to have more discussions on this conversation, and we will do it in the near so future. I want to just make my remarks, and then I'm going to let Dr. Doja come and give her closing remarks, and I'm going to ask Reverend John Williams to give us a closing prayer. Let me say thank you to the Social Action Commission. You have done a phenomenal job all month long with taking the vision that I gave you back in June for doing Justice in July forums. Each forum that we've had each week has been phenomenal. And I am so grateful for you, Sister Marlene Taylor Crawford, and Dr. Cheryl Davenport Dozier, and pulling these together each week. It has been phenomenal, and we have learned so much information. So please continue to do the work in social action and social justice. And anybody that's watching that's a part of New Bethel AME Church, if you would like to join this ministry, please let us know. We want you to be a part of this ministry. We need you, and your voice and your work is needed as we continue to make a better community. As we continue on tonight, Dr. Dozier is going to come and she's going to give closing remarks, and then Reverend John Williams will give us a closing prayer. Thank you all once again for an awesome job on tonight.
Thank you, Pastor, and thank you once again. He's already said that. We all know that there's lots of work yet to be done. I am so proud of each and every one of these young people tonight. Our job is to make this world a better place for you. And we regret that you are living through some of the same challenges that you heard each of our speakers speak of, as well as myself. This world should not still have injustices. You should not be impacted by racism. There should be no profiling. But we look to you to help change this world. And we looked, and I am already excited by John Radford, and knowing that you are going to be a civil rights attorney and you're going to make a difference. I am excited about each and every one of the young people. I've heard you, Jade, and you have been consistent, and Sydney and Tyler and all of you in speaking truth to power. So let's use that energy. Let's make sure that we get that quality education so that we can make a difference in this great world that we live in, and that we also know that when man cannot answer the questions that we need, we take it to the Lord in prayer. Reverend John?
Most awesome and loving God, truly, we thank you for preparing these individuals to pass on such valuable information this evening. Lord, this information is going to go a long way to helping all of our people, the community, to survive in these days, at these times that we live in. Lord, we thank this commission for continuing to work hard and pull these kind of events together. Thank you. Thank the leadership for continuing to provide, continuing to bless this community as it does. Lord, we thank you. We thank you. We thank you, because we are well informed. We're well informed. That will make us better disciples for your case, Lord. That will put us better and make us better. So we thank you. We're going to continue to lift you up. We're going to continue to praise your name. In all things, we ask these blessings in the honorable and matchless name of our Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you, young people. Have a great night, everyone.
Dr. Dozier, if I can be of assistance in any way to any of those persons out there in Facebook land or Zoom land, just happen to contact you, and then you have my, because I'm a New Bethian from my heart.
That's right. We're
I
going to
really
have
am.
you back. We're going to have you back again. I will call you. And the same with you, Chief Lumpkin. You are now an honorary member of New Bethel AME Church. We will have you back to meet with our young people. Thank you all. And I will call you. I'll give you a call tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you.
As I said, I was born in AME and I will probably die.